The distant hope had been dying for 3 days. Captain Tellith pressed her trembling hands against the navigation console, watching the fractured lines spread across its surface like veins of darkness. Around her, the bridge creaked and groaned with structural fatigue. The refugee ship had never been designed for extended flight. It was a cargo hauler, hastily retrofitted with life support pods and packed far beyond capacity with the survivors of Verani Prime. 240 souls. That was all that remained of a world of 12 million. She could still see it when she closed her eyes. The Kraventhi bombardment fleet hanging in orbit like jeweled daggers, the first strikes turning her planet's cities to glass, the desperate scramble to the spaceport as the sky itself seemed to burn. They had launched with half the engine cores offline, life support failing, and hull breaches sealed with whatever materials they could find. For 6 months they had run, jumping from system to system, always one step ahead of their pursuers. Now even running was beyond them. "Captain, primary drive is gone," her engineer Milan reported. His bioluminescent patterns flickered orange with distress, visible through his thin scaling. "Secondary is overheating. We have maybe one more jump before total failure." Tellith studied the star charts with growing desperation. They had been trying to reach the Neutral Confederacy, a loose alliance of minor species who sometimes granted asylum. But they were still 3 systems away, and the Kraventhi knew their trajectory. Commander Vectesh and his warship Sovereign Talon had been hunting them specifically, broadcasting their location to ensure no port would accept them. "The navigation system is compromised," Milan continued, his voice tight with fear. "The targeting algorithms are corrupted. I cannot guarantee accuracy." "Then we jump blind," Tellith said quietly. "Choose any system outside Kraventhi space, anywhere we might find mercy." Milan's patterns shifted to deep purple, the color of profound doubt. They both knew what that meant. The galaxy had watched the Verani cleansing with cold indifference. The Galactic Council had declared it an internal Kraventhi matter. Mercy was a concept that seemed to have died with their homeworld. But staying meant certain death, and at least a blind jump offered a chance. "Charging jump drive," Milan said. "May the old lights guide us." The old lights, Tellith thought bitterly, had gone dark when Verani Prime burned. The distant hope shuddered as its failing engines gathered the last reserves of power. Through the viewport, Tellith could see the pinpricks of distant stars, each one representing a world that had turned them away or ignored their distress calls. She thought of the children sleeping in the cargo holds, too young to understand that they were the last generation of their species. She thought of the cultural archives stored in the ship's damaged computers, the sum total of Verani civilization reduced to corrupted data files. The jump drive engaged with a sound like reality tearing. For a moment there was nothing. Then the universe inverted and the distant hope was somewhere else. Alarms screamed immediately. Tellith grabbed her console as the ship lurched violently, already falling into a gravity well. Milan's patterns blazed red with panic. "We are in atmosphere." The jump placed us inside a planetary envelope. Tellith felt ice flood her chest. A jump into atmosphere was a death sentence. The ship was not designed for controlled descent, and their failing engines could not arrest their fall. "All hands brace for crash landing," she transmitted shipwide, forcing calm into her voice even as her patterns betrayed her terror with rapid violet flashes. "Protect the children." The distant hope screamed through alien skies, its hull heating to dangerous levels. Through the viewport, Tellith caught glimpses of a blue and green world, vast oceans and brown continents, white clouds and strange geometric patterns that might be cities. The ship's computer, barely functional, managed one final act. It identified the world from its galactic registry. Sol 3. Common designation, Earth. Tellith's patterns went white with shock. Every species in the galaxy knew that name. Earth, the deathworld. Home to humanity, the violent primates who had clawed their way to spaceflight through countless wars, who lived on a planet of such extreme conditions that it had forged them into something dangerous. Humans were tolerated in galactic society barely, because no one wanted to provoke them. They were large, aggressive, and disturbingly difficult to kill. The Verani had been told to avoid human space at all costs, and now they were crashing directly into the human homeworld. The ground rushed up to meet them. Milan fought the controls, managing to level their descent just enough that they hit at an angle rather than straight down. The distant Hope carved a trench through what appeared to be agricultural land, soil and vegetation spraying in their wake, before finally slamming into the base of a forested hillside. The impact threw Teleth against her restraints hard enough to crack 2 ribs. Around her, the bridge disintegrated into sparks and smoke. Emergency lighting cast everything in blood-red illumination. For a long moment, there was only the sound of settling metal and distant screaming from the passenger sections. Then Milan was pulling her free, his patterns yellow with pain but functional. Together they stumbled through the wrecked corridors, finding terrified Verani emerging from the holds. The children were crying, their patterns chaotic with fear. Several adults were injured, but miraculously, it seemed no one had died in the crash. They had survived only to land in perhaps the worst place in the galaxy. "Open the outer hatches," Teleth ordered, her voice hoarse. "We need to evacuate before the ship's reactor breaches." As the hatches opened, cool alien air rushed in. It smelled strange, rich with scents Teleth could not identify. She helped guide her people out onto the torn Earth, and for the first time, the Verani refugees stood on the surface of Earth. The world around them was beautiful in a terrifying way. Massive trees towered overhead, larger than any plant on Varen Prime. The gravity was crushing, nearly 1.3 times what they were adapted to. The air was thick, oxygen-rich, and the sun overhead blazed with an intensity that made Teleth's eyes water. This was a deathworld, everything about it screamed danger. "Captain," one of her crew whispered, patterns flickering white with terror. "What do we do?" Before Teleth could answer, she heard sounds in the distance. Mechanical roaring growing closer. Voices calling out in an alien language. The humans were coming. Teleth gathered her people close, putting herself between the children and the approaching sounds. This was how it ended then. They had escaped the Kraventhi only to crash on a world of predators. She began preparing the words she would use to beg for a quick death, at least for the children. The first human emerged from the tree line, and Teleth's patterns flashed pure white. The creature was massive, easily twice her height, with a heavy build that spoke of dense muscle and bone adapted to this crushing gravity. It wore bright yellow coverings marked with reflective strips, and it carried equipment she did not recognize. Behind it came more, driving wheeled vehicles and carrying strange devices. The lead human stopped, and Teleth saw its eyes widen behind transparent face protection. For a moment, human and Verani stared at each other. Then the human slowly raised its hands, palms forward, and spoke in a surprisingly gentle voice. The words were incomprehensible, but the tone was not threatening. It was careful, cautious, almost concerned. Another human approached, this one carrying a device that it activated with quick manipulations. A mechanical voice emerged, speaking in heavily accented but recognizable Galactic Common. "Do not be afraid. We are emergency services. Are any of you injured?" Teleth's patterns cycled through confusion, disbelief, and lingering terror. This was not what she had expected. Not at all. Yes, she managed, her voice translator struggling with the unfamiliar language structure. "Many injured, ship reactor may fail. We have children who need help." The humans moved into immediate action, but nothing like the violence Teleth had feared. They approached slowly, carefully, always keeping their movements visible and non-threatening. Some began scanning the distant Hope with handheld devices, while others brought forward large containers. One human, a female with kind eyes, approached the Verani children. She moved slowly, kneeling to reduce her intimidating height, and opened a container to reveal soft, colorful fabric items. She wrapped one around the nearest child, a young male named Petrin whose patterns were flickering with exhaustion and fear. It was a blanket. The human was covering the frightened child with a blanket. More humans arrived in a steady stream over the next hour. Vehicles with wailing sirens, aircraft that descended with impossible precision, and eventually, a large transport vehicle that the translator called an ambulance. The humans brought medical equipment, food that the ship's computer confirmed was compatible with Verani biology, and most incredibly, hot beverages in containers that could be held for warmth. Teleth watched in stunned disbelief as the most feared species in the galaxy carefully triaged her people's injuries, set up climate-controlled shelters, and gently coaxed terrified Verani children into accepting warm drinks and sweet foods. A human male approached her, older than the others, with silver in his head hair and deep lines around his eyes. He wore a formal uniform different from the emergency responders, and he carried himself with unmistakable authority. "I am Fire Chief Thomas Reinhardt," the translation device said in his voice. "You are safe now. We are preparing transport to take your people to proper medical facilities and shelter. Can you tell me where you came from?" Teleth felt her ribs grinding with each breath, felt the weight of 6 months of terror pressing down on her, felt the absolute impossibility of what was happening. These were humans, deathworlders. They should be tearing her people apart, not offering them hot chocolate and medical care. "We are Verani," she said, patterns cycling through every color of confusion. "Refugees from the Kraventhi cleansing, our ship failed. We did not mean to come here. We did not mean to trespass on your world." Reinhardt's expression shifted to something Teleth could not read, but his tone remained gentle. "You did not trespass. You crashed. There is a difference." He paused, then added quietly, "And you are safe here. I promise you that." Teleth's patterns finally settled on pale blue, the color of tears, as 6 months of desperate flight finally caught up with her. "We have nowhere else to go," she whispered. Reinhardt nodded slowly, and when he spoke again, there was something hard beneath the gentleness, something that reminded Teleth that for all their kindness these were still the deathworlders. "Then I suppose," he said, "you will stay here." The news spread across Earth at the speed of modern communication. Within 6 hours of the crash, footage of the Verani refugees was playing on every major news network. The images were striking. Small, luminescent beings wrapped in emergency blankets, their patterns glowing with fear and exhaustion, surrounded by the massive forms of human first responders who moved with surprising gentleness. Within 12 hours, the first vigils began. Citizens of the small Canadian town nearest the crash site organized food drives, clothing donations, and offers of temporary housing. The global response was immediate and overwhelming. Offers of help poured in from every continent. Within 24 hours, the situation had reached the United Nations headquarters in New York. Ambassador Marcus Reeves stood at the window of his office, looking out over the city as dawn broke across the skyline. He was a man of 53 years, with neat dark hair graying at the temples and the careful posture of someone who had spent 3 decades in diplomatic service. He had been Earth's primary liaison to the Galactic Council for the past 7 years, navigating the complex politics of a human species still finding its place among the stars. He had never dealt with anything quite like this. Behind him, his assistant, Jennifer Park, was organizing the flood of incoming communications. "The Secretary General wants a briefing at 9 a.m. The Verani have been moved to a secure medical facility in Toronto. Initial medical assessments show malnutrition, radiation exposure, and significant psychological trauma, but nothing life-threatening with proper care." "And the ship?" Reeve asked without turning. "Total loss. Our engineers are examining it, but it is not going anywhere. The reactor has been safely shut down." Park hesitated. "Ambassador, there is something else." The Verani captain, Teleth, provided their story to the response team. "It has been verified through galactic records." "Tell me." Park's voice was tight with controlled anger. "The Kraventhi Empire declared the Verani species ecologically redundant 3 years ago. It is a formal designation, approved by their governing council, that allows systematic elimination of a species deemed to be consuming resources without providing sufficient value. Varen Prime was the first world cleansed. 12 million individuals killed in a 2-week bombardment campaign." Reeve closed his eyes. He had heard of the Kraventhi policy, but this was the first time he had encountered its victims. "These 240 are survivors from that world," Park continued. "They have been running for 6 months, jumping from system to system, refused sanctuary at every port. The Galactic Council classified them as Kraventhi subjects and ordered all member species to deny them asylum." "On what grounds?" Reeves' voice was dangerously quiet. "Non-interference in internal species matters. The Council determined that the Kraventhi have legal authority over their own subject populations. Reeve turned from the window, his expression hardening. And the other Verani colony worlds, 17 worlds according to records, all targeted for cleansing. Current estimates suggest fewer than 10,000 Verani remain alive in the entire galaxy, scattered in small refugee groups. Park met his eyes. Ambassador, we need to decide what to do with these people. The Kraventhi will demand their return. Return them to what? Their deaths. Reeve shook his head sharply. Not happening. The legal situation is complex. Earth is not a full council member, only an observer state. We have trade agreements and diplomatic relationships that could be jeopardized if we refuse to comply with council law. Then we will deal with those consequences. Reeve moved to his desk, pulling up files on his computer. Get me everything we have on refugee law, both Earth and Galactic, and contact Admiral Kato at Fleet Command. I want to know our military options if this turns ugly. Park hesitated at the door. The public response has been overwhelming. There are already protests forming, demanding we protect the Verani. Social media is calling it "no one gets left behind." Reeve allowed himself a slight smile. Whatever else could be said about humanity, they had never been particularly good at abandoning those in need. It was a trait that had caused them trouble in galactic politics before, this tendency to prioritize ethics over efficiency. He suspected it was about to cause trouble again. The Kraventhi warship Sovereign Talon dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system exactly 72 hours after the crash. It was an impressive vessel by galactic standards, 800 meters long, bristling with plasma cannons and missile batteries, with shields capable of withstanding sustained fire from most planetary defense systems. It bore the marks of its service, scarring from previous engagements, and it broadcast its presence with undisguised arrogance. Commander Vectesh stood on his bridge, studying the blue-green world on his display with cold satisfaction. Humans. Of course, the fugitives had crashed on the deathworld. It was almost poetic. Vectesh was a career officer of the Kraventhi Empire, a species that had dominated their region of space for 300 years through superior military technology and ruthless efficiency. He was tall even by Kraventhi standards, nearly 3 meters, with the distinctive crest that marked his command rank. His skin was a deep crimson, marked with scars that he wore as badges of honor. He had been hunting the distant hope specifically for 6 months, ever since the vermin had escaped from Verani Prime. It had become personal. These Verani had made him look foolish, evading his pursuit repeatedly. Now they had delivered themselves to a world where his legal authority was unquestionable. "Hail the human government," he ordered his communications officer. "Demand the immediate return of the Verani fugitives under Galactic Council law." The response came within minutes, routed through several diplomatic channels before reaching Vectesh directly. A human male appeared on his screen, older, with that unsettling predator directness in his eyes that all humans seem to possess. "Commander Vectesh," the human said, the translation rendering his words into Kraventhi. "I am Ambassador Marcus Reeve, representing the United Nations of Earth. How may we assist you?" The politeness was expected, but Vectesh heard the subtle steel beneath it. Humans were known for that, speaking softly while preparing for violence. "You are harboring 240 Verani fugitives who are legally subjects of the Kraventhi Empire. Under Galactic Council law, specifically Statute 47B regarding refugee status, they must be immediately remanded to Kraventhi custody." "I am aware of Statute 47B, Reeve replied calmly. "I am also aware that Earth is not a signatory to that particular statute. As an observer state, we maintain sovereignty over who we grant sanctuary to within our own system." Vectesh felt his crest flush with irritation. "Your observer status is conditional on cooperation with Council law. Refusal to comply will result in economic sanctions and possible expulsion from galactic trade networks." "Perhaps," Reeve said, his expression unchanging. "But that is a decision for my government to make, not yours. The Verani refugees have formally requested asylum on Earth. We are evaluating their petition." "There is nothing to evaluate. They are criminals under Kraventhi law. What crime have they committed? Vectesh paused, surprised by the question. They fled legal judgment. They resisted lawful cleansing operations. Cleansing operations. Reeves' voice went very quiet. Commander, I have reviewed the records. The Verani homeworld was inhabited by 12 million beings. Your fleet bombarded it until nothing lived. You are pursuing the survivors across the galaxy to finish the job. If that is your definition of lawful, then I suggest our legal systems are fundamentally incompatible. Your opinion is irrelevant. The Council has ruled on this matter. The Council ruled without Earth's input. We were not consulted, and we are not bound by decisions made in our absence. Reeve leaned forward slightly. Commander, I am going to be very clear with you. Those refugees crashed here by accident. They asked for our help, and we do not turn away people asking for help, regardless of what your council says. Vectesh felt anger building in his chest. This human dared to lecture him on law. You are making a serious mistake. The Empire will not forget this insult. Neither will Earth forget that you hunted refugees across 12 systems, Reeve replied evenly. I think we understand each other, Commander. The Verani are staying here. If you wish to file a formal complaint with the Galactic Council, that is your prerogative, but you will not be taking them from our world. The transmission ended, leaving Vectesh staring at a blank screen. For a long moment he simply stood there, processing the conversation. Then he turned to his tactical officer. How long to orbital bombardment range? Approximately 6 hours at standard approach, Commander. Vectesh nodded slowly. Perhaps it was time the galaxy remembered that Kraventhi authority was not to be dismissed. These humans needed to learn respect. Take us in, he ordered, and ready all weapon systems. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council convened at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, attended by representatives from all permanent and rotating member states, as well as key figures from Earth's defense establishment. Secretary-General David Amundsen presided over the session with grim efficiency. He was a Norwegian diplomat, 61 years old, with a reputation for principled decision-making that had sometimes put him at odds with more pragmatic politicians. Today, that principled nature would be tested like never before. The situation is this, he began without preamble. We have 240 Verani refugees who crashed here by accident. They are victims of genocide, hunted across the galaxy, and they have asked for our protection. The Kraventhi Empire demands their return. The Galactic Council supports that demand, and a Kraventhi warship is currently approaching Earth with, we believe, hostile intent. He paused, looking around the chamber. The question before us is simple. Do we surrender these refugees to their deaths to maintain our galactic relationships, or do we protect them and face the consequences? The Chinese representative spoke first. The economic impact of isolation from galactic markets would be severe. We have integrated supply chains, technology exchanges, and trade agreements worth trillions of dollars. Can we afford to jeopardize that for 240 individuals? Can we afford not to? The Indian representative countered. If we surrender refugees to genocide, what does that say about our values? What does it say to our own citizens? It says we are pragmatic, the Russian representative said bluntly. It says we understand realpolitik. The galaxy does not share our sentimentality about individual lives. Ambassador Reeve, present as an observer, raised his hand. When Amundsen nodded to him, he stood. I have spent 7 years working with the Galactic Council, he said quietly. I have watched them debate for months over minor trade disputes while entire species are cleansed. I have seen them prioritize stability over justice, efficiency over compassion, time and time again. And I have come to understand something. They do not respect us because we share their values. They fear us because we do not. He looked around the chamber. The Kraventhi are betting that we will choose profit over principle. They believe we will surrender these refugees because the economic cost is too high. If we do that, we prove them right. We become just another species that values resources over lives. But if we stand firm, if we demonstrate that there are lines we will not cross regardless of the cost, then we change the calculation. We show the galaxy that humanity means something different. Pretty words, the French representative said, but the Kraventhi have a warship in our system. What do we do when they start shooting? Admiral James Cato stepped forward. He was a third-generation military officer, 55 years old, with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for conflict. As commander of the Earth Defense Fleet, he had been quietly building humanity's military capabilities for the past decade. "Then we shoot back," he said simply. The chamber fell silent. "Admiral," Amundsen said carefully, "the Kraventhi warship outmasses any single vessel in our fleet by a factor of 3. Their plasma cannons outrange our weapons. Their shields are state-of-the-art. On paper, they should be able to destroy our entire defense grid." "On paper," Cato agreed. "But paper does not account for human tactical doctrine." He activated a holographic display showing the sovereign talon. "Galactic warfare is ritualized, predictable. Ships close to medium range exchange fire with energy weapons until one side's shields fail, then retreat or surrender. It has been done this way for so long that they have forgotten other approaches." He zoomed in on the Kraventhi ship's shield systems. "Their shields are optimized for energy weapon defense. Plasma, lasers, particle beams. They are very good at stopping those. But humans did not develop energy weapons first. We developed kinetics, missiles, railguns, mass drivers, and we have continued to advance those technologies because they work in ways that galactic engineers do not expect." "You are saying we can win?" The British representative sounded skeptical. "I am saying we can make them regret attacking us," Cato replied. "Our ships are smaller, but they are faster and more maneuverable. Our weapons may be primitive by galactic standards, but they are effective. And most importantly, we are willing to use tactics that the Kraventhi will not anticipate." Amundsen looked around the chamber. "This is not a decision to make lightly. If we fight, people will die. If we surrender the refugees, they will certainly die. I need to know where this council stands." The vote took 20 minutes of debate, but when it came, it was decisive. 14 votes in favor of granting asylum, 1 abstention, 0 votes to surrender the Verani. Amundsen nodded slowly, feeling the weight of history settling on his shoulders. "Then it is decided. Ambassador Reeve, draft a formal response to the Kraventhi. Admiral Cato, prepare your fleet. And someone get those refugees somewhere safe, because in a few hours, this is going to get very complicated." The Verani refugees watched the news broadcasts from their temporary shelter in Toronto, huddled together in the large community center that had been converted to emergency housing. Telith sat with the children, trying to keep her patterns calm and reassuring even as she watched the human news channels debate her people's fate. The translation software provided by their hosts rendered the rapid-fire human speech into comprehensible galactic common, but the emotional intensity needed no translation. Humans, she was learning, felt things very strongly. "Captain," young Petrin asked, his patterns flickering with anxiety, "will they send us away?" Telith wrapped her arms around the child, careful of his injuries. "I do not know, little one, but these humans, they are not what we were told to expect." In the 3 days since the crash, Telith had been continuously surprised by human behavior. They had been given medical care that rivaled anything on Verani Prime, food specifically prepared to meet Verani dietary needs, and shelter that was adjusted to their comfort. Human volunteers rotated through constantly, offering assistance, teaching them about Earth, and simply talking with them. The humans seemed genuinely angry about what had happened to the Verani. They used words like genocide and war crime and unacceptable. They spoke of something they called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which apparently guaranteed certain protections regardless of species or origin. It was bewildering. The galaxy had watched Verani Prime burn and done nothing. Humanity had known them for 3 days and was willing to risk economic sanctions to protect them. On the screen, a human news anchor was interviewing someone identified as a historian. "This fits a pattern in human behavior," the historian was saying. "Throughout our history, we have had this tendency to protect the vulnerable, even at significant cost to ourselves. It is not always rational, it is not always successful, but it is deeply embedded in our cultural psychology. We see someone in need and we respond. Even when it is not in our best interest," the anchor asked. "Especially then, humans have this concept we call doing the right thing." It supersedes practicality. We know it is irrational, but we do it anyway. Tellith felt her patterns shift to warm gold, the color of hope. Perhaps they had crashed in the right place after all. A human volunteer approached, a young woman named Dr. Lisa Nakamura, who had been assigned as their primary liaison. She smiled gently at Tellith. "Captain, I wanted you to know that the United Nations has voted to grant you asylum. All of you. You are going to stay on Earth." Tellith's patterns blazed so brightly that several children gasped. They chose to protect us. Yes, the vote was nearly unanimous. Nakamura's expression turned more serious. But I need to be honest with you. The Kraventhi are not happy about this. Their warship is approaching Earth and the situation may become dangerous. We are moving all of you to a secure bunker facility just as a precaution. If there is fighting, it will be because of us, Tellith said, her patterns dimming with guilt. We brought this danger to your world. No, Nakamura said firmly. The Kraventhi brought this danger when they decided to hunt refugees. You just crashed here. There is a difference. She paused, then added more softly, and even if there was not, we would still protect you. That is what humans do. As they began organizing the refugees for transport to the bunker, Tellith found herself thinking about the galaxy's view of humanity. Deathworlders, they were called. Violent, aggressive, dangerous. And perhaps they were all those things. But they were also this. A species that would risk war to protect strangers who had literally fallen from the sky. The Sovereign Talon reached optimal firing range at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Admiral Kato stood on the bridge of the EDS Resolute, Earth's flagship carrier, watching the Kraventhi warships approach on tactical displays. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency, years of training evident in every movement. Status of the fleet. He asked his executive officer, Commander Patricia Wells. All ships at battle stations and holding position at 50,000 kilometers from the Talon. Weapons charged, defensive systems online. We are ready, Admiral, Kato nodded. The Earth Defense Fleet consisted of 6 carriers and 40 escort vessels, ranging from heavy cruisers to fast attack corvettes. They were outnumbered in terms of tonnage by the single Kraventhi warship, but Kato had not built this fleet to fight fair. Incoming transmission from the Talon, the communications officer reported. Put it through. Commander Vektesh appeared on the main screen, his expression radiating contempt. Human Admiral, you have 30 minutes to deliver the Verani fugitives to my ship. If you refuse, I will take them by force. The Verani are under Earth's protection, Kato replied calmly. They are not going anywhere. Then you choose war. Very well. But know this, your primitive fleet cannot stand against Kraventhi military power. I will destroy your ships, bombard your planet, and take the fugitives from the ruins. Your defiance accomplishes nothing except the deaths of your own people. Kato felt a cold anger settle over him. He had spent 10 years preparing for this moment, the inevitable conflict with a species that would test humanity's resolve. He had hoped it would not come, but now that it had, he was ready. Commander, I am going to give you one chance, he said quietly. Turn your ship around and leave this system. If you do, we will forget this incident. If you do not, I promise you that the Sovereign Talon will not leave Earth's orbit intact. Vektesh laughed, a harsh barking sound. You are either very brave or very stupid. Let us discover which. The transmission ended. All ships, this is Resolute Actual, Kato broadcast on the fleet-wide channel. The Kraventhi have chosen to engage. Execute Plan Theta on my mark. Make every shot count. The Sovereign Talon opened fire first, its plasma cannons launching brilliant lances of superheated matter across the space between the ships. It was an impressive display, the kind of overwhelming firepower that had cowed dozens of species into submission. The Earth Defense Fleet did not try to match it. Instead, they scattered. The carriers and heavy cruisers activated their defensive grids, point defense lasers tracking and destroying incoming plasma bolts with computer-assisted precision. Simultaneously, the fast attack corvettes accelerated to speeds that would have been reckless by galactic standards, dancing through the Talon's firing solutions with aggressive maneuvering. Vektesh watched the tactical display with growing confusion. The humans were not engaging. They were evading, using thrust-to-weight ratios that should have crushed their crews with acceleration. How were they surviving those maneuvers? Target the largest human vessel, he ordered. Concentrate fire. The Sovereign Talon's weapons focused on the resolute hammer blows of plasma that should have overwhelmed any defense. But the human carrier's point defense network was unlike anything Vectesh had encountered. Instead of shields that absorbed energy, it used thousands of small laser emplacements that simply destroyed incoming fire before it could impact. And while his attention was focused on the carrier, the human corvettes closed to point-blank range. Firing solution achieved, Commander Wells reported calmly. All ships report ready. Fire, Kato ordered. The Earth ships opened fire with railguns and mass drivers, weapons that accelerated physical projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. The Sovereign Talon's shields, optimized to deflect energy weapons, offered almost no resistance. Tungsten penetrators moving at 15,000 kilometers per second simply punched through them like they were not there. The first impact struck the Talon's hull with devastating effect. Kinetic energy converted to heat and shock, tearing through armor that was designed to ablate plasma but had no defense against hypersonic solid shot. Secondary explosions bloomed across the Kraventhi ship as power conduits ruptured and fuel lines detonated. Vectesh stared at his damage displays in disbelief. In less than 30 seconds, his ship had taken more damage than in its last 4 engagements combined. Warning lights blazed across every station. Hull breaches were reported on 6 decks. The main plasma batteries were offline. How were these primitive humans doing this? Evasive maneuvers. He roared, but the Talon was built for slugging matches, not agility. It could not escape the swarm of human corvettes that danced around it, each firing precise bursts from their massed drivers, each shot finding gaps in the weakened shields. "Admiral," his tactical officer said, voice tight with panic, "shields are failing across all sections. We have lost weapons control. Life support is compromised on multiple decks. Sir, we need to withdraw." Vectesh felt something he had not experienced in 20 years of military service: fear. Another transmission came through, the human admiral's voice calm and professional. "Commander Vectesh, you have one chance to leave this system alive. Stand down your weapons, transfer emergency power to your engines, and jump out immediately. If you do not comply in the next 60 seconds, my fleet will reduce your ship to debris." It was the most humiliating moment of Vectesh's life. But as he looked at the tactical display, at the damage reports, at the human ships that circled his crippled vessel like predators around wounded prey, he realized he had no choice. The Kraventhi had underestimated humanity. They had believed their own propaganda about primitive deathworlders, and it had nearly cost him his ship and his life. "Cease fire," he ordered quietly. The Sovereign Talon limped out of Earth system 2 hours later, trailing debris and venting atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches. On the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Kato watched it go with grim satisfaction. "Damage report?" he asked Commander Wells. "Minimal, sir. The EDS Vanguard took a glancing plasma hit. Shield generators are offline, but hull integrity is intact. No casualties across the fleet. The Kraventhi never adjusted their tactical doctrine once we demonstrated our capabilities." Kato nodded slowly. That was the advantage of being underestimated. The galaxy had written humanity off as primitive because they used kinetic weapons instead of energy beams, because their ships were smaller, because their technology did not fit the established patterns. They had forgotten the fundamental lesson that had shaped human military thinking for millennia. The best weapon is the one your enemy is not prepared to defend against. "Stand down to alert status," he ordered, "but keep the fleet deployed. I doubt the Kraventhi will try again, but I would rather be ready if they do. Sir, incoming transmission from the Secretary General." David Amundsen appeared on screen, and Kato could see the tension in his expression. "Admiral, well done. But we need to talk about what happens next." "The Galactic Council will not be happy," Kato said bluntly. "No, they will not. I have already received 14 urgent communications from Council representatives. They are demanding an explanation for our unprovoked attack on a Kraventhi vessel." Amundsen's tone made clear what he thought of that characterization. "But there is something else. We are receiving signals from other Verani refugee groups. They heard about the engagement. They want to come to Earth. Kato felt something shift in his chest. How many? At least 17 ships that we know of. Maybe 3,000 individuals total. And it is not just Verani. 3 other species have made contact, asking if Earth's asylum offer extends to them as well. Does it? Amundsen was quiet for a moment. That is the question, is it not? We made a decision to protect 240 refugees who crashed here by accident. Do we extend that protection to anyone who asks? Do we become the galaxy's sanctuary? If we do not, Kato said quietly, then what was the point of this? He gestured at the tactical display at the retreating Kraventhi ship. We just proved that we are willing to fight to protect refugees. If we turn away others now, we show that our principles are negotiable, that we only help when it is convenient. And if we accept them, we set ourselves against the established order of the galaxy. We become a magnet for every persecuted population, every refugee, every species deemed inconvenient by someone more powerful. The political and economic consequences could be enormous. Yes, sir, Kato agreed. They could be. Amundsen studied him through the screen. You think we should do it anyway? I think, Kato said carefully, that humanity did not become humanity by always making the practical choice. Sometimes we made the right choice, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. That is what I think, sir. Amundsen nodded slowly. Then I suppose we had better start preparing for more guests. Keep your fleet ready, Admiral. I suspect we are going to need it. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session 36 hours after the engagement. The council chamber was a magnificent space, a vast circular room with seating for representatives of 247 member species, all arranged in tiers that rose toward a central platform where the council leadership presided. Holographic displays floated throughout the chamber, showing live feeds from across the galaxy, translation matrices rendering thousands of languages into comprehensible speech, and voting tallies that tracked every decision. It was designed to inspire awe, to remind all present of the galaxy's grandeur and complexity. Ambassador Marcus Reeve, standing in the observer section reserved for non-member species, was thoroughly unimpressed. He had spent the past day preparing for this moment, reviewing legal precedents, consulting with Earth's best diplomatic minds, and steeling himself for what was certain to be a hostile reception. Now, as the council came to order, he watched the political theater unfold with the practiced eye of a veteran diplomat. The council presider, a Sulthani named Muresh, called the session to order with a sonorous chime. Sulthani were insected beings, with multiple limbs and compound eyes that gave them an unsettling appearance by human standards. But they were renowned for their administrative capabilities and their obsession with procedure. We are convened to address the incident in the Sol system, Muresh began, his voice translated into thousands of languages simultaneously. Ambassador Reeve of Earth, you stand accused of violating Galactic Council Statute 47B regarding refugee status, and of conducting an unprovoked military attack on a Kraventhi vessel engaged in lawful pursuit of fugitives. How do you respond? Reeve stepped forward, his movements calm and deliberate. I reject both accusations, Presider. Earth did not violate Statute 47B because we are not signatories to that statute and therefore not bound by its provisions. And the attack was not unprovoked. Commander Vektesh explicitly threatened to bombard Earth if we did not surrender refugees under our protection. We defended ourselves. A murmur ran through the chamber. The Kraventhi representative, a female officer named Turvish who had arrived to replace the disgraced Vektesh, stood abruptly. The humans are twisting the facts. The refugees are Kraventhi subjects. They have no right to grant them asylum, and their military response was grossly disproportionate to the situation. Disproportionate, Reeve turned to face her, and his voice carried an edge that made several nearby representatives shift uncomfortably. Representative Turvish, your empire has spent 3 years systematically exterminating the Verani species. You have destroyed 17 worlds, killed millions of beings, and hunted the survivors across the galaxy like animals. When 240 of those survivors crashed on Earth by accident, your response was to send a warship and threaten planetary bombardment. And you have the audacity to lecture us about proportionality. The Verani situation is an internal matter of the Empire, Turvis shot back. The Council has already ruled on this. You had no right to interfere. Then the Council's ruling is wrong. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives from dozens of species began speaking at once, some in support of Earth's position, many more outraged by the challenge to Council authority. Muresh chimed the session to order repeatedly before the noise subsided. Ambassador Reeve, Muresh said, his tone glacial, you cannot simply declare Council rulings invalid because you disagree with them. That is not how civilized species conduct themselves. Then perhaps, Reeve said quietly, humanity has a different definition of civilized. He activated a holographic projector, filling the center of the chamber with images. Verani Prime burning under Kraventhi bombardment. Refugee ships destroyed in space. Verani children starving in overcrowded holds. The 240 survivors wrapped in blankets after their crash on Earth, their patterns glowing with terror and exhaustion. This is what your statute protects, Reeve said, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. This is what you call lawful. You sit in this chamber, representatives of hundreds of worlds, and you debate procedure and protocol while entire species are erased from existence. You write laws that prioritize order over justice, stability over compassion, and then you call yourselves civilized. He paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. Humanity is new to the galactic community. We are primitive by your standards, barely a century into spaceflight. But we learned something in our long and violent history. Laws that protect genocide are not worth following. Civilizations that permit atrocities in the name of non-interference are not worth preserving, and we will not be party to either. You are a single species, another representative called out, a Threxian from the industrial worlds. You cannot set yourself against the entire council. The economic consequences alone would be devastating. Perhaps, Reeve acknowledged, but we will endure them. Earth has faced extinction events before. We have survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, plagues, and our own worst impulses. We will survive this too. The question is whether the Council can survive losing its moral authority. Muresh's compound eyes fixed on Reeve with what might have been anger or respect or simply confusion. What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador? I am proposing that Earth will grant asylum to any refugee from persecution, regardless of their species or origin. We are establishing what we call the sanctuary doctrine. Any being who reaches Earth seeking protection will receive it. Any species that attempts to forcibly extract refugees from Earth or human-protected space will face military resistance. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. The chamber erupted again, but this time Reeve could hear something different in the cacophony. Not just outrage, but also interest. Hope, perhaps, from representatives whose own species had suffered under the current system. A Verani representative stood, an elderly female named Prisith, who was one of the few of her species to hold council observer status. Her patterns glowed with barely controlled emotion. The humans are right, she said, her voice shaking. The council abandoned my people. You watched us die and did nothing because it was inconvenient to intervene. And now you condemn the one species that actually helped us. Her patterns flashed to brilliant white, the color of defiance. I stand with Earth. One by one, other representatives began to stand. A Myrthan delegate whose species had been displaced by colonial expansion. A Helkari observer whose homeworld was under threat from resource extraction. A Quellan whose people had been classified as second-class citizens in their own system. Not many, perhaps 24 out of 247, but enough to show that Earth was not alone. Muresh watched this development with visible dismay. The Council operated on consensus and careful balance. Fractures like this could undermine the entire system. This session is adjourned, he declared abruptly. The Council will deliberate on these matters and issue a formal response. Ambassador Reeve, you and your species will answer for this disruption. Reeve bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that did not concede anything. We look forward to it, Presider. Earth will be here when you are ready to discuss substantive reform rather than procedural complaints. As he left the chamber, several of the representatives who had stood approached him. Prisith reached him first, her patterns cycling through gratitude and desperation. Ambassador, there are 17 Verani ships still in hiding, scattered across 4 sectors. Can your offer of sanctuary truly extend to them? It can and it does, Reeve replied. Tell them to set course for Earth. We will protect them. And my people, a Myrthan delegate, his feathered crest raised in agitation. We have refugee populations that have been stateless for decades. Would Earth accept us as well? Yes. Anyone fleeing persecution is welcome. Reeve paused, then added, but I must be honest with you. This will not be easy. There will be shortages, logistical challenges, and political conflicts. Earth is one planet and we have limits to what we can provide, but within those limits we will do everything we can. The Myrthan's crest flattened in relief. That is more than anyone else has offered in 20 years, Ambassador. We will take you at your word. As Reeve made his way back to his ship, he felt the weight of what he had just set in motion. Earth had just positioned itself as the galaxy's sanctuary, a refuge for the persecuted and the desperate. It was idealistic to the point of recklessness, impractical in a dozen different ways, and would certainly cause massive political and economic complications. It was also, he believed, exactly the right thing to do. Over the following weeks, the refugee ships began to arrive. The first was a Verani transport, the Luminous Path, carrying 340 survivors who had been hiding in an abandoned mining station. They entered Earth's orbit with their transponder broadcasting peaceful intent, and their engines barely functional, having pushed them past all safe tolerances to reach the one place in the galaxy that had promised safety. The Earth Defense Fleet escorted them in with full honors, and Admiral Kato personally welcomed their captain to Earth. Next came a Helkari Ark ship, enormous and ancient, carrying 1,800 beings whose homeworld had been strip-mined into uninhabitability. They had been nomads for 3 generations, always moving, never welcome. Earth offered them settlement rights in Australia, where vast stretches of arid land could be terraformed using Helkari environmental technology. Then a Myrthan fleet of 7 ships, sleek and desperate, carrying 600 refugees from religious persecution. They were given land in South America, where their unique agricultural methods could flourish. Each arrival brought new challenges: language barriers, cultural misunderstandings, resource allocation debates, and the endless logistics of integrating alien populations into human society. But each arrival also brought new possibilities. The refugees were not just victims. They were engineers, scientists, artists, farmers, and builders. They brought knowledge and skills that Earth had never possessed. The Verani had advanced biotechnology. The Helkari understood stellar engineering. The Myrthan had agricultural techniques that could green deserts. Each species contributed, transforming their sanctuaries into partnerships. Captain Tellith found herself appointed as a liaison between the Verani refugees and human authorities. It was exhausting work, translating not just languages but entire worldviews, helping her people understand human culture while explaining Verani needs to human administrators. But it was also hopeful work. She stood in a community center in Toronto, watching Verani children playing with human children, their patterns glowing with joy as they chased each other through a playground designed to accommodate both species' needs. Young Petrin was laughing, his patterns bright gold, as a human girl showed him how to slide down a piece of equipment the humans called a slide. Dr. Nakamura approached, carrying 2 cups of tea. Your people are adapting well. We are trying, Tellith replied, accepting the cup gratefully. Humans drank tea constantly, she had learned. It seemed to be their solution to every problem. It is strange to feel safe. We have been running for so long that we forgot what it was like to simply exist. There is still opposition, you know, Nakamura said quietly. Some humans think we took on too much, that we should have turned you away. There are protests, political debates, economic concerns. I know, we watch your news broadcasts. Tellith's patterns dimmed slightly. We understand if your people regret helping us. That is not what I meant. Nakamura smiled. I meant that despite the opposition, despite the very real costs and challenges, the majority of humans still support giving you sanctuary. We are not a perfect species, Captain. We argue about everything, we make mistakes, and we sometimes act on emotion rather than logic. But when we see someone in need, we help. It is just who we are. Tellith felt her patterns warm to gentle gold. Your species is very strange, Dr. Nakamura. We know. We embrace it. Across the city, Ambassador Reeve was meeting with representatives from 12 more refugee groups who had contacted Earth. The logistics were staggering. Earth's population was already 8 billion. Adding even a few million refugees created infrastructure challenges that would take years to fully address. But they would address them. Humanity was nothing if not adaptable. The Galactic Council has imposed sanctions, his assistant Jennifer Park reported during a briefing. Trade restrictions on 47 categories of goods, technology transfer limitations, and diplomatic isolation protocols. The economic impact will be significant. How significant? Reeve asked. Preliminary estimates suggest a 12% reduction in GDP over the next 3 years, with the heaviest impacts in technology and manufacturing sectors. Some politicians are calling for a reversal of the sanctuary doctrine. Will it happen? Park shook her head. The polls are holding steady. 67% of humanity supports continuing to accept refugees, even with the economic costs. The no one gets left behind movement has become a global phenomenon. Politicians who oppose it are being voted out. Reeve allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes humanity's stubborn idealism was a liability. Sometimes it was their greatest strength. What about military threats? Any sign the Kraventhi are planning another incursion? No, sir. In fact, we are seeing the opposite. The Kraventhi are withdrawing from several border regions. Intelligence suggests they are concerned about further engagement with human forces. Park pulled up a classified report. Admiral Kato's tactical innovations are being studied by every military in the galaxy. The kinetic weapon doctrine is being called revolutionary. Several species have reached out asking about technology exchange. Tell them we will consider it, but only with species that commit to refugee protection protocols. Reeve leaned back in his chair. If we are going to reshape the galaxy's approach to this issue, we might as well be systematic about it. The breaking point came 6 months after the initial engagement, when the Council attempted to enforce its sanctions through a naval blockade. A fleet of 42 ships from 6 different species assembled at the edge of Earth's system, led by a Threxian admiral named Kalvax. Their mission was simple: prevent any more refugee ships from reaching Earth, demonstrate the consequences of defying Council authority, and force humanity back into compliance. Admiral Kato watched them assemble with cold calculation. The blockade fleet was impressive, representing a significant commitment of resources from multiple species. But it was also a coalition force, with no unified command structure and no experience working together. They are trying to intimidate us without actually fighting us, Commander Wells observed. Show of force to make us back down. Then we will show them why that is a mistake, Kato replied. He opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, prepare for Operation Exodus. We are going to break that blockade. The Earth Defense Fleet had grown since the engagement with the Sovereign Talon. 8 carriers now, 60 escort ships, and 2 new classes of vessel specifically designed for combat operations, stealth corvettes that could operate behind enemy lines, and arsenal ships that were essentially flying mass driver platforms. They did not attack the blockade directly. Instead, they did what humans had done throughout their military history. They outmaneuvered it. While the blockade fleet held position at the system's primary jump point, expecting Earth ships to challenge them directly, Kato sent his stealth corvettes on wide-ranging patrols through the outer system. They found what he expected: gaps in the blockade coverage, blind spots where the coalition ship's sensor arrays did not quite overlap. Refugee ships approaching Earth were quietly redirected to these gaps, guided through by human navigators who knew every asteroid and orbital trajectory in their home system. The blockade fleet, watching their scanners, never saw the refugees slip past them. By the time Admiral Kalvax realized what was happening, 14 more refugee ships had reached Earth safely. His carefully orchestrated demonstration of power had been rendered meaningless by human ingenuity and intimate knowledge of their own system. The blockade fleet withdrew after 3 weeks, having accomplished nothing except to demonstrate that Earth could not be easily coerced. The Council's sanctions remained in place, but they had lost their teeth. Other species, seeing humanity's defiance succeed, began quietly reconsidering their own policies toward refugees. The galaxy was changing, slowly but inexorably. 2 years after the Distant Hope crashed in rural Canada, Earth hosted a conference that would reshape galactic politics. It was called the Sanctuary Summit, and it brought together representatives from 42 species, including several who were still technically Council members but were increasingly sympathetic to Earth's position. The stated purpose was to establish formal protocols for refugee protection and resettlement, but everyone knew the deeper agenda: to create an alternative to the Galactic Council's authority. Secretary General David Amundsen opened the conference with a simple statement: "We are here because the current system is broken. It prioritizes stability over justice, and it has failed to protect the most vulnerable. We are here to build something better." Ambassador Reeve led the diplomatic efforts, working 18-hour days to build consensus among species with wildly different cultures, needs, and political systems. It was exhausting, frustrating work, but gradually, a framework emerged. The Sanctuary Compact, as it came to be called, established several key principles. First, that refugees fleeing persecution had a right to asylum, regardless of the legal claims of their persecutors. Second, that member species would contribute resources and space for refugee resettlement based on their capabilities. Third, that any species that attacked refugee populations would face collective military response from all compact members. It was idealistic, certainly. It would be difficult to enforce, absolutely. But it was also the first time in galactic history that a coalition of species had formally prioritized humanitarian principles over political convenience. 42 species signed the initial compact. Over the following year, 19 more would join. The Galactic Council, watching this development with growing alarm, found its authority increasingly questioned. Species began defying Council rulings, citing compact principles. Trade networks that had been controlled by Council regulations fractured into new patterns. The carefully maintained balance of power that had characterized galactic politics for centuries was breaking down. And at the center of it all was Earth, the deathworld that had stumbled into becoming the galaxy's conscience. Captain Tellith stood on a hillside overlooking the settlement that the Verani had built in Ontario. It was a strange hybrid of architectural styles, combining Verani bioluminescent organic structures with human engineering. At night, the entire settlement glowed with soft light from the buildings themselves, visible for kilometers in every direction. The Verani population on Earth had grown to 8,000 now. Births had begun to outpace deaths. For the first time in 3 years, Tellith's species was growing instead of shrinking. Ambassador Reeve joined her on the hill, moving slowly in the manner of humans adjusting to evening chill. He had aged visibly in the past 2 years, the stress of reshaping galactic politics leaving its mark. "Your people are thriving," he observed. "We are," Tellith agreed, her patterns glowing with contentment. "We have built something here, not a replacement for Varen Prime, but something new, something born from tragedy but growing toward hope." The other species feel the same way. The Helkari are already talking about making Earth their permanent home rather than searching for a new world. The Murthan have integrated so thoroughly into South American agriculture that the locals cannot imagine farming without them. "You have given us more than sanctuary," Tellith said quietly. "You have given us a future." "Why? I have studied human history, Ambassador. You are not a uniformly kind species. You have your own wars, your own prejudices, your own capacity for terrible acts. What made you help us when no one else would?" Reeve was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I think," he finally said, "it is because we remember being vulnerable. Humanity nearly destroyed itself a dozen times before we reached the stars." We know what it is like to face extinction, to feel helpless, to be at the mercy of forces beyond our control. And we decided, collectively if not always consciously, that we never wanted to be the species that turned away from someone else's suffering. He paused, looking out over the glowing settlement. We are not perfect, Captain. We still make mistakes, we still have conflicts, we still struggle with our own demons. But we try to be better, and sometimes trying is enough. Tellith's patterns shifted through colors that had no direct translation in human language, emotions that combined gratitude, sadness, hope, and a deep affection for this strange species that had saved her people. Your species will change the galaxy, she said. You already have. Perhaps, Reeve replied. Or perhaps we have just reminded the galaxy of what it should have been all along. 5 years after the crash, the change was undeniable. Earth now hosted 47,000 refugees from 12 species. The Sanctuary Compact had grown to 73 members, representing nearly a third of all spacefaring civilizations. The Galactic Council still existed, but its authority had been fundamentally challenged. Species that had once cowered before its rulings now openly defied them when they conflicted with compact principles. The Kraventhi Empire had not attempted another cleansing. They still ruled their territory with an iron fist, but the presence of the compact made mass extermination too costly. Refugee populations had somewhere to run, and pursuing them meant risking conflict with an alliance that included humanity's increasingly sophisticated military. Persecution had not ended, suffering had not disappeared, but the calculus had changed. The vulnerable had options, the powerful had limits. And in the vast complexity of galactic civilization, that was something. Admiral Kato stood on the observation deck of the Resolute, now flagship of a fleet that had grown to 20 carriers and 200 escort vessels. Earth had not started a war, but they had certainly prepared for one. The galaxy was learning that humanity's compassion did not mean weakness, that protecting refugees did not mean passivity. In a park in Toronto, human and Verani children played together under the warm spring sun. Petrin, now 7 years old in human years, chased his best friend Maria through flowering gardens, his patterns bright with joy. He had been born on Verani Prime, had survived its destruction, had fled across the galaxy, and had crash-landed on a world he had been taught to fear. He did not remember much of that anymore. What he remembered was Earth. The planet that had taken him in, protected him, and given him a home. On the bridge of a refugee ship approaching Earth's orbit, a Quellan mother held her children close as they saw the blue-green world growing larger on the viewport. They had fled religious persecution, spent 2 years in hiding, and finally gathered the courage to trust in rumors of a deathworld that protected the desperate. She did not know what to expect. But she hoped, perhaps for the first time in years, that they might finally be safe. Earth Traffic Control welcomed them with professional warmth, guiding them to a designated landing area where human and Verani volunteers waited with blankets, food, and the promise that they had reached the end of their running. The galaxy had not become perfect. It had not even become good by any absolute measure. But it had become something better than it was, changed by the actions of one species that had refused to accept cruelty as inevitable. They had been refugees who landed on Earth by mistake, terrified and desperate, expecting death from the galaxy's most feared deathworlders. Instead, they found humanity. And humanity, in its strange and stubborn way, had refused to let them go.